SWAC talk, light on the mic, it's a play. See Wells the guy taking us state to state. Catch us Wednesday, Sunday, stats on the buffet. From gridiron to the court, we got the say. Football spirals, hoop dreams in the chat. Chopping it up, deep dives on every stat. Texas to Florida, repping border to border. Arkansas to Bama, the vibe getting warmer. SWAC talk, keep the knowledge on deck. See well spinning, wisdom gotta show respect. Facts flying higher than a wide receiver's check. From football to hoops, what y'all expect? Guests roll through, dropping stories untold. Legends from the SWAC, spitting straight gold. Locker room vibe, secrets unfold. CW heavy like a championship hold. The South's got a rhythm, a culture to match. Each stat, each fact, another door latch. SWAC talk connects like a perfect pass catch. From Alabama skies to Florida's grass patch. SWAC talk, keep the energy alive. Wednesday to Sunday, where the legends thrive. Facts and stats sharper than a coach's knife. Ballin' on the mic, that's how we survive. Keep the energy alive. Wednesday to Sunday where the legends thrive. Facts and stats sharper than a coach's knife. Ballin' on the mic, that's how we survive.
All right, everybody, what is going on? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show. Welcome to SWAC Inside and Out. Of course, I am your tour guide around the SWAC, C. Wells. And today we're going to do a little something, man. I did this last year. I'm going to do it again this year. We're going to go through the schedule week to week and just, kind of give my watchability rankings for the week as a whole. Now, obviously, we can't say, this game is the game of the week or that game is the game of the week because, A, we're in June and we don't know how these teams are going to be playing at that portion of the season. But these weeks will be kind of defined by, the buzz that could be going around those games at that certain point, and just what we infer these matchups to look like at this point. So, and so we did this about this time last year, so I want to do it again this year, and we're gonna go ahead and jump into it. So y'all make sure y'all hit those socials: Facebook is SWAC Talk, Instagram SWAC Talk, Twitter SWAC Talk 76. Don't forget to like the video, comment, and share your thoughts. What games you're looking forward to. What weeks you think got the best games. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted whenever videos drop. Don't really have a concrete schedule for the week. No SWAC smoke this week. We'll be back with that next week. So I'll probably drop a video maybe Wednesday or so. But just keep it locked and see when my next thing comes at you this week. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into this, and like I said, we're gonna start at week 0 and go to the end of the season. Obviously, week 0 is the MEAC SWAC Challenge. That game is on Saturday, August 23rd, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, ABC, in Atlanta, Georgia, North Carolina Central versus Southern. I always assign this weekend a 10 because A, it's the only game on, and B, is the first game of the season. So you're gonna want to watch. If you went through, the spring and then the summer and then fall camp, and you got a football game live on TV that Saturday, and you a SWAC person or HBCU person, you're gonna want to watch this game regardless of the opponent. So that alone makes it a 10 week. This is an intriguing matchup, and we'll talk about that more as we get closer to it. Both teams were in the hunt. Well, Southern, quote unquote, in the hunt for the championship because they played in the game. North Carolina Central was in the hunt for the MEAC championship. So both of these teams do have expectations coming into the season, and like I said, we'll get into that as we get closer. So obviously, week 0 is a 10, and this could have been Valley versus Delaware State, and to me, it would be a 10 week because this is the first game of the actual 2025 season in D1 HBCU football. So it doesn't get any higher than that. and it's on prime time ABC. So it gets no higher than that. So this week gets a 10. Week one is always a mixed bag because you got a lot of FBS games, you got some D2 games, you got a few FCS games. But for the most part, like I said, you got games all over the place, and we'll look at these games. We have two Thursday night games for teams to open up their slate. Alabama State is at UAB. That's August 29th. That's a Thursday, and Alcorn is at Northwestern State. Bethune-Cookman is at Florida International. That's on Friday, August 29th. And then Saturday, August 30th, you have the Orange Blossom Classic at 3 p.m. in Miami. Howard versus Florida A&M. That game was on Sundays. Now it's on Saturday. So there is no Sunday week one game in the SWAC anymore, at least at this point. Um, that game will be shown on ESPNU. You got Alabama A&M versus at Arkansas. UAPB at Texas Tech, Prairie View at Texas Southern in the Labor Day Classic, Langston versus Grambling in Shreveport, Southern at Valley, and Hampton at Jackson State. This is an intriguing first full week of the season. You do have the Labor Day Classic, which is the only SWAC versus SWAC matchup that counts in the standings. Um, and that's a big game. Coach Jackson, first game at Prairie View versus Coach Dishman going into his second year, coming off of a victory over Prairie View last season. There's a lot of buzz around the Panthers this season, so obviously this game is interesting to watch just on the strength of that. And this game is always an interesting game, one way or the other, between these two teams. And there's a lot riding on this game. Both teams have expectations, and if you drop this game, you're not out of anything, but you make it a little bit harder on yourself. And so a lot of people are going to want to see what Prairie View brings to the table because there is a lot of buzz around the Panthers, and people want to see them in action. So what better way to see them in action than against their rivals? So I'm sure that makes this week a pretty high watchability week. Hampton and Jackson State is an interesting game. Nice FCS home game for Jackson State. Southern and Valley is a SWAC matchup, but it's not a conference matchup. I never felt good about that in terms of that matchup. Also, Howard and Florida A&M is an intriguing matchup. Can the Rattlers get their season off to a good start against Howard? And then other than that, we have Grambling playing Langston in Shreveport, which is the only D2 game on the schedule this week. And then the rest of the games are FBS matchups. So like I said, it's a mixed bag, and that Labor Day Classic probably is going to do the heavy lifting in terms of watchability outside of maybe your own team. So I'm going to give this week a 7, mainly because the fact that we have those FBS games, and you do have another FCS game on the slate, but it's a Thursday night game. That's always kind of tough to get into. But I think with it being such a mixed bag, 7 is a pretty good score for the opening week. Sometimes it's lower because you have a lot more FBS matchups on the schedule in week one, but that's a pretty decent opening week for everybody. And you do have a game with some huge intrigue and some huge stakes. So that kind of carried the weight there. Week 2 is Saturday, September 6th. So it's the first Saturday of September. You got Grambling at Ohio State. 2:30 p.m. on Big Ten Network. Jackson State at Southern Miss. 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock on ESPN Plus. Texas Southern at Cal. 5 p.m. On the ACC Network. Florida A&M at Florida Atlantic. 5 p.m. on ESPN Plus. Bethune-Cookman at Miami. 6 p.m. ACC Network. University of Texas Rio Grande Valley at Prairie View. UAPB at Central Arkansas. Alabama State at Southern. Tarleton State hosts Valley, and Alcorn is at Alabama A&M. So we have 2 SWAC matchups, but again, they're not conference games. So that kind of takes a little bit of the buzz off of it. But Southern and Bama State is probably the game that has the most intrigue on this list. These two teams haven't played in Baton Rouge in almost 10 years. The last time they played was in 2023 to kick off the 2023 season. And so they haven't really had a lot of matchups. They did play in the spring of 2021, but there hasn't been a lot of, matchups between the two teams. So that makes it interesting. Of course, you got Andrew Body and the Alabama State offense, coming to Baton Rouge, looking to have some momentum. Their defense looking to prove some things. Southern, the same thing. Southern will be coming off of 2 games. Who knows, how they're going to come in off of those 2 games. But this could be a very intriguing matchup in terms of momentum for both teams. It's not a conference game, but it's still a big game. It's the home opener for Southern. Um, I'm hoping this game does get some TV somewhere, even if it's ESPN Plus. Hopefully, it's televised somewhere, a SWAC digital network or something. I think this game would be a good game to have on TV. Um, Other than that, there's not a lot there in terms of intriguing games. You have a lot of FBS matchups. You actually have five of the games this week are FBS matchups, so it's very heavy on this week. The rest of the games are FCS matchups, but you don't really have you got a couple mismatches, and you got a couple games that could be interesting, but not enough to really bump the scale. But I'm gonna give this week a 6. It's not bad, but it's not great either. I mean, of course, I'm sure some people are going to be interested in the Grambling game just because that's their first trip to Ohio State. Ohio State's a historical place to play. If you're into those kind of games, it could be cool to see Grambling run out into the horseshoe. So it could be something there, but for the most part, there's not a lot there. The Jackson Southern Miss game obviously going to have some buzz around it if Jackson comes in, 1-0. So we are, that could pick up some intrigue, but other than that, not a lot there in terms of must watch. So that's why that week gets a 6. Week 3 is September 13th. All Saturday games again. We got Bethune-Cookman at South Carolina State. That game is 5 p.m. East Central or ESPN Plus. Miles at Alabama State, 5 p.m. kickoff. Alcorn at Mississippi State. Purview at Rice. Valley at Southeastern Louisiana. The game is also on ESPN Plus at 6 p.m. Lincoln at UAPB. Lamar at Texas Southern. Albany State at Florida A&M. Southern at Fresno State. Tuskegee at Jackson State. Alabama A&M at Tennessee State, and Kentucky State at Grambling. Um, like the previous week was a lot of FBS games. This week is a lot of sub D1 games. You got like I said, you got Alabama State and Miles. You got Lincoln and UAPB. You got Albany State and Florida A&M. You got Tuskegee and Jackson. You got Grambling and Kentucky State. So 5 um, of the 12 games are against D2 teams. You have three FBS matchups, including one SEC matchup, and then the rest are FCS matchups. But there's nothing here really that's like a must watch. Like like this is like a week that you can't miss this game. Uh, and so for that, I would give this week a 5. The Bethune-Cookman South Carolina State game is intriguing because it's an HBCU matchup. But we don't really know what Bethune-Cookman got. But South Carolina State's coming off of a Celebration Bowl, so if you want to see if they're gonna get off on a good foot for the season, you can watch for that. I mean, and you can just watch to see Bethune-Cookman is playing better this season. Other than that, there's not a lot there. In terms of must watch. So that's why this week is kind of a 5. Like I said, it's more of a mixed bag than week 1 because this week you got a lot of D2 games and you got that Lincoln game for Pine Bluff, and then the rest of them are like FBS games. So there's not a lot there for you. And so I mean, obviously you want to watch like football. It's 12 games, so you can find one to watch if they're televised, but it's not a run out and watch week. Week 4, you only have 4 games on the schedule this week. A lot of people are off, and so you get September 20th, Edward Waters at Bethune-Cookman, Northwestern State at Prairie View, East Texas A&M at Grambling, and Lane at Alabama A&M. Again, 2 FCS matchups. two D2 games. It's not any game here that I would say is a must watch game. I mean, you got two Southland versus SWAC games. The SWAC did beat both of these teams. The two teams beat these teams they played last season. So you want to see them hopefully beat these guys again. Then you can watch that. Other than that, there's nothing really there. I mean, Bethune lost to Clark last year, so maybe you watch for that to see if they, how they play against Edward Waters. But this is probably an even worse week than the week before. So I'm not gonna even linger. I'm gonna get this week a 4. This is like if it's on and you watch it, if you scrolling through or you're on YouTube and you come up on it, you watch it. Unless these are your teams, I don't really see anybody kind of breaking their neck to watch. But I mean, obviously, you kind of take a glance at one. If you see it come up, you don't go out your way to watch it. Week 5 is September 27th. We get our first actual SWAC matchups. And there's a lot of games on this list, and this is a good week of football and there's two big games on the schedule. You open up the day with Alabama and them at Bethune-Cookman. I get a feeling that's probably gonna be your HBCU goal game. Uh, Va- uh, Alcorn versus UAPB in the Southern Heritage Classic in Memphis. Grambling against Prairie View in the State Fair Classic. I'm sure that's going to be an ESPN Plus game. Jackson at Southern, Alabama State at Florida A&M, and Texas Southern at Valley. This is a full SWAC week, and the two big games are Jackson State at Southern and FAMU hosting Alabama State. That's enough to carry a week. Um, that's two intriguing games, and also that State Fair Classic. So 3 out of the 6 games for sure are games that can really carry this week. Um, Everything else is kind of is going to really depend on how both teams are playing. Um, but I would give this week an 8. This is a strong week. Um, Almost, I would honestly, I would almost give this a 9. This is a very strong week of football, and you looking at the game times, you're probably gonna have, you can watch one game in the afternoon, and then, the rest of them are kind of evening games. So I think week 5 is probably outside of week 0, probably the strongest week of the season so far. So there's a lot of, must watch games there. So I really wouldn't hesitate to say to go out and watch week 5 because I think it's going to be a good week of football. All right, next week is week 6, Saturday, October 4th. Again, these are all conference matchups. You got 5 games on the schedule this week. So you get Florida A&M at Valley, Bethune-Cookman at Alabama State, UAPB at Texas Southern, Prairie View at Alcorn, and Jackson State versus Alabama A&M in Mobile. Um, this week is not as strong as the week before. Um, the only game that really would probably drive my intrigue would be um, the Prairie View Alcorn game. Could be interesting. They played a couple close matchups recently. Of course, I think, like I said, I think a lot of people are gonna tune in to Prairie View to just see how they do. Jackson State, Alabama, and them is an intriguing game in Mobile. That game's been, closer than the score has been closer than the game have been the last couple of years. But again, Alabama and them new coach, so you kind of want to see how these guys do throughout the season. And then for the memes and stuff, you got Valley Valley versus FAMU. I saw some over their game is moved to Atlanta, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Uh, I hope not because I don't really think Valley gonna unless they getting a good bag. I think that's a waste moving that game there for them. But um, just for the memes, that's one of those kind of games you want to watch. But um, there's some solid games here. So I'll give this week a 7. Um, nothing to blow your socks off, but it's still all conference games. So that kind of gives it a little bit of a boost. I rather a week of I don't say dull, but I rather a week of conference matchups that aren't like knock your socks off than a non-conference week of games that don't knock your socks off because it's SWAC games, and at the end of the day, these games affect everybody's standings. So, and the SWAC is hard, so you could see an upset in one of these games. So you kind of, you kind of want to keep tabs on that. Week 7 is October 11th. You got Southern at Bethune-Cookman, Westgate Christian at UAPB, Lincoln at Alcorn, North Carolina Central at Florida A&M, Alabama State at Jackson State, Valley at Alabama A&M, and Texas Southern at Grambling. This could be a strong week of just on the strength of North Carolina Central at Florida A&M and Alabama State at Jackson State. This could be a strong week of football, and it still is gonna be. But those two games with Lincoln and Westgate Christian weigh this week down so much. Obviously, I don't think those games gonna be televised anywhere, so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. But you're looking at this as a whole. Those two games really weigh down this week, and the two games I named before that are big games. One's a conference game, one's a non-conference game, but those are two big matchups. Texas Southern at Grambling is an intriguing matchup. Um, so you do have some really strong games, and then you have a couple games that are just like why. So I'm gonna balance it out. I'm gonna give this week a 6 because I think those two strong games are strong enough to carry this week, and unless your team is playing in another game, those two games are games that if you can watch them, you probably watch them outside of your own team. So if you got a day game or something, and one of those games at night, you probably can watch that, and that'll outweigh that those other two games. So I think if those two games weren't on the schedule, and you had those two Westgate and Lincoln games on the schedule, this would be like a 2 or 3 week, man. It'd be close to trash. But those two games are pretty strong, so I think they carry the weight for that. Week 8 is October 18th. You get Virginia Lynchburg at Texas Southern, Grambling at Pine Bluff, Lincoln at Valley, Prairie View at Southern, and Alcorn at Florida A&M. This is another one of those weeks. You got Virginia Lynchburg and Lincoln. That weighs this week down a lot. Prairie View at Southern is intriguing. Um, Southern won the last two games at Prairie View. Prairie View won the last two games at Southern. These two teams have been to the SWAC championship basically every year since the 2021 season. So, odds is one of these teams are probably going to go back. So this is a big game in that aspect. Um, Alcorn at FAMU again. These two teams haven't played in forever, and this has been the one matchup that a lot of people have been asking for in the SWAC, and you get it. Other than that, there's nothing here. And I don't think either one of those two games are strong enough. This is not like week 7 where you have two games that are strong enough to carry the week. And that's why this is the 5 week. Um, I'm not going to give it a 4, but I'm going to give it a 5. It's like a 4.9 and round up to 5 because just there's not a lot there. You know what I mean? And for a lot of people outside of Southern and Prairie View, unless both these teams have a great record, there's not going to be a crazy amount of intrigue into this game. But it's it's probably going to be for the lead in the West Division at this point, so that makes it an intriguing game. And other than that, there's nothing here. So hopefully, maybe one of these other games, one of these other SWAC games, both teams are playing well, and that'll make up for those two Virginia Lynchburg and Lincoln games because those two games just don't carry any weight to me. Week 9 is the last week of October, weekend of October, October 25th. You get Pine Bluff at Bethune-Cookman. You get the Magic City Classic, Alabama A&M versus Alabama State. You get FAMU at Southern, Valley at Alcorn, Grambling at Jackson State in Vegas, and Lincoln at Prairie View. Lincoln should be a SWAC team by this point, man. I see their name come on so many schedules. They might as well be an honorary SWAC member, and you get credit for beating them. As a substitution for one of your conference losses. They pop up on way too many schedules. But this is a great week here. You got Grambling at Jackson in Vegas. That matchup, even if it was in the hole or at the vet, that's a big matchup regardless of these two teams' records. So that's a big game for this week. FAMU at Southern is a matchup that's always big. Um, and the Magic City Classic speaks for itself. So this is a strong week. Those three games are doing all the heavy lifting for this week. Um, and then you have two other swag matchups, and then you have the Lincoln game. So this is a strong week, and I give this week an 8 because I gotta take off a little bit for that Lincoln game, but I think the other three games are really gonna be big games, and Grambling and Jackson is probably gonna lead the pack on that. But the Magic City Classic, in terms of intrigue, it would not be that far behind. That would be Coach Shade first Magic City Classic, so it's always interesting to see a new coach in that game, and him trying to get off of a slide, and you can turn your season around in that game. And it's always a game that's never boring. Whether the score is low or the score is high, it's never a boring game. Um, and last year, A&M fell behind and made a spirited comeback, came up short. You've had overtime games, you've had multiple overtime games. You've had us upsets, and being an outdoor game, the weather can play a factor sometimes. So, that's always an interesting game to watch. And so that helps make this a strong week. Week 9 is one of the stronger weeks of the season. Week 10 is the first Saturday of November, November 1st. You got Alcorn at Texas Southern, Southern at Pine Bluff, Valley at Bethune-Cookman, Alabama State at Prairie View, Jackson State at Florida A&M, and Alabama A&M at Grambling. Jackson State of Florida A&M is always going to be strong enough to carry any week that game is in. Um, that's like regardless of the record, just the off the field, um, who off the field stuff between the fans and everything. That gives this game like a +2. So this game this week is one of those weeks where you got one game that everybody's probably going to be watching, regardless of who else is playing. So this is an 8 week just off the strength of that. Alabama State and Prairie View is an intriguing game. These two teams could be, fighting it out for their division. So that makes this a big game, and everything else is kind of, you know, teams trying to survive, late season games, trap games, and things like that. So that FAMU Jack State game week is huge, and that alone makes this week a good week. So I think this is an 8 week there. Week 11 is November 8th. You get FAMU at Pine Bluff, Jackson at Valley, Texas Southern at Alabama State. Um, that's an interesting matchup. I mean, some of the players are different, but you got Texas Southern, Andrew Body's old team against Andrew Body's new team. That's always, when you see a guy play against his former program, even though it's been a couple of years in between, and his new coaching staff, but there are some guys who were there. So that might be, there's always going to be some buzz for a game like that. Prairie View at Alabama A&M, Southern at Alcorn, and Bethune-Cookman at Grambling. Um, Southern and Alcorn could be a game that's big for the division, and then that Alabama State Texas Southern game is a game that I would, just for the matchup and the history between one player and another team. That makes this like a 6 week. Nothing crazy there and nothing bad there, but I don't think it's enough intrigue for any one game to carry this week. I mean, Southern and Alcorn, like I said, that could be a matchup for the West Division. And strange things happen when Southern go to Alcorn. So if you want to see something strange, you watch that game that week. But I think coming off of the previous week, you need that cool down. Week 12 is November 15th. You get Pine Bluff at Valley, Texas Southern at Southern, Grambling at Alcorn, FAMU at Alabama A&M, Bethune-Cookman at Jackson and Alabama State, and Grambling in Mobile. Um, this is another full week. I think this is the last full week of conference play, because the next couple of weeks are the next couple of weeks you have a few teams off, and then the last week is like Bayou Classic and Turkey Day Classic. So this is the last actual full week of SWAC football. Everybody's in action in conference play. So that alone makes this a week to watch. The games aren't necessarily knock your socks off, but the clock is ticking here, and you're probably going to have teams battling it out for divisions. And even though they're not necessarily playing, division contenders, these are games that some of these teams you don't, if they slip, they could lose the division. So um, that alone makes this a 6 week. There's no crazy must watch games here in terms of just intrigue and name, but they're awesome games that are gonna have some weight for one team or the other, and so that makes this is one of those. Maybe I watch, if I can, I watch 3 or 4 games, flipping between 3 or 4 games, because you got 2 or 3 teams in each game that are battling it out for their divisions. Are they trying to play catch up? Are they trying to keep pace with somebody? So this is one of those weeks that you could see a division get clinched, or you could see a division, be stretched out to the last couple of weeks. So that alone makes this a must watch week. And this week here, actually, both divisions got clinched last season, so you could possibly see that. Or you could see that you could see this week make week 13 a big week. And so week 13 is November 22nd. That's pretty much the majority of the conference's last regular season game. You have 5 matchups on this day. You got Valley hosting Valley at Prairie View, Alabama A&M at Texas Southern, Pine Bluff at Alabama State, and then you got the Florida Classic, Bethune-Cookman versus Florida A&M, and you got the Soul Bowl, Alcorn versus at Jackson State. Those 2 games are enough to carry this week. And again, the other 3 games aren't marquee games, but Prairie View could be battling it out for the West Division. Texas Southern even could be in the battle for the West Division. Bama State could be in the hunt for the East. So those are 3 games that you saw the West Division be lost on this Saturday in 2022. So it could happen. It could happen, or somebody could lock it up. All these could be games just being played because the divisions are already locked up. But you have 2 rivalry games, and rivalry games are always going to give an extra boost to a week. So I give this week like a 7, because I think without those 2 rivalry games, it's not a crazy week. But these games are traditionally here, so I'm gonna give this week a 7, because those 2 games do a lot of heavy lifting. We don't know what the other 3 games could mean sitting here on June 1st. Um, on November 21st, looking at these games for that Saturday coming up, all these games could be important. But right now, you got 2 games that mean a lot, and the other 3 games you don't know right now. So that's why I marked this week a 7. And then week 14 is the final regular season week. You got 2 games there. You got Tuskegee at Alabama State on Thanksgiving, November 27th, and Southern and Grambling in New Orleans on November 29th in the Bayou Classic, 2 o'clock, well, 1 o'clock Eastern time, on 1 o'clock Central Time on Peacock Network. Um, this is a historical week. Whether you follow these teams or not, this is your last week to really see a couple games. So that alone makes it intriguing week. Um, just the fact that these are 2 rivalry games, I'm going to give it a 7. Um, the Bayou Classic could be for a lot. And if it is, that makes this week even bigger. Um, Other than that, you don't really have a lot, because Bayou Classic could mean a lot. It could mean nothing. In terms of standings, I mean, it always means something. But I think that this is not one of those weeks that if you're looking for you know a great game intrigue wise, you get that in these 2 games, but standings wise, maybe not. So there's not a lot there in terms of that, but it could possibly be. And the Turkey Day Classic is just one of those games that you want to put on if you're not watching. You really want to watch this. You really want to have this game on while you're chilling with your family on Thanksgiving. Um, so that makes for something to watch maybe after you laying down after your meal. So that's good football to watch on 2 days, and those are the last 2 regular season games. So that makes it even more important to watch. And so I'll give that week a 7. And finally, week December 26th is December 6th is the SWAC championship game. Um, that game is huge no matter what. You might not get a great matchup because you East and West aren't always balanced. but it's for the SWAC championship game. And if you want to see, that team who has been kind of running the show throughout the conference, see them, make that last hurdle over over to the Celebration Bowl, then you got that. Or, you can be watching for a possibility of upset. So something intriguing is going to happen, and that makes this a 10 week. And it's also the only game on, so that also makes things important. And it's for the SWAC championship, so that makes it doubly important. And then December 13th is the Celebration Bowl, uh, 11 a.m. kickoff in Atlanta. That's a 10. Again, don't matter the matchup, but it's gonna be for the national championship. Could be a rematch from last season. Could be two different teams. We don't know, but it's gonna be a huge game to watch. And it's the last game of the season for everybody. So, just that alone makes this a must watch, and it's for the championship. And so, and you want to see the SWAC can win three straight in this. So that's another boost in intrigue. So that makes this a 10 week as well. So this is actually schedule wise. This week has a lot of highs. Um, week 0, obviously. I think it was week 9. Um, week 8, I believe. There's some strong weeks there. There's a couple subpar weeks, but I think all in all, this is a pretty solid season to watch. Not a lot of bad weeks of football. There's a couple that I would say, you got to really be a dedicated watch everybody play type of person to get into those weeks, especially your team ain't playing. But there's some intriguing games, and again, sitting here on June 1st, a lot of these games may not mean as much as they will when we get into the season. So the possibility of this changing is great, because some of these games may mean more as the season moves along. But sitting here now, this is a pretty solid week, and I think it's going to be a great season to watch week by week. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC Seawells, signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.